Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my greenhouse. My name is Joe. It's early October and it is a magnificent day here in Central Europe. Wonderful sunshine, clear blue skies, unbelievable cactus weather, except we're coming to the end of the growing season. We're definitely moving into the fall-autumn period and rapidly approaching the winter dormancy period here on the Northern Hemisphere. In this video today, I thought I'd give you an early fall or autumn update and just give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things happening in my greenhouse, what's going on with some of the plants, and what's in the planning for the next weeks and months. If you're interested in joining me for that update, stay tuned, then this is definitely the video for you. Welcome back everyone, my name is Joe. So let's just take a look at some of the themes and topics that are actually really relevant and important for this time of the year. First of all, it's watering. Watering of the plants. The majority of cacti and succulent plants, they of course will be going into dormancy in the winter, and this transition period from the growth period into the dormancy is always a really critical one. The most critical question I think that we as hobbyists always struggle with is, when should I last water my plants? When should I stop watering them so that the substrate can dry out, so that the plants can stand, completely dry and with quite cool temperatures? At least that's what I do over the winter months for their dormancy. You might have seen recently I put out a number of shorts videos that are dealing with that topic of watering. And, you'll see that one of the topics covered was, when should I last water my plants? So rather than me duplicating all that here in this video again, I recommend you just pop over after this video to those watering videos and just take a look at some of my thoughts on the topic there. Now, seeing the temperatures we currently have here, temperatures outside have really dropped. Highs are now around 15 degrees centigrade. What's that, about 60 degrees maximum Fahrenheit. And, that means I'm really reducing the watering. Here in the greenhouse, there are a couple of plants that I still water a little bit, not the full-on watering that I would have given them during the summer months, but, a little bit of water. There's also the autumn growers or the autumn bloomers like the Ariocarpus cacti. Those are wonderful cacti that actually, after a summer dormancy where, during especially August, partly also July, August, they really like staying dry. That also coincides, of course, with the usually hottest time of the year. And during that period, just holding back with the watering for them is quite important, because that also then helps them prepare for their bloom, the blooming season that they have, which is during autumn. And then as we get into September, that's when I start watering those plants a little more again. And that's when they start developing their absolutely beautiful blooms. So Ariocarpus, typical autumn growers and autumn bloomers that need that last growth spurt, if you like, of the year. They need that watering late in the year to help them develop those blooms. In the greenhouse, there's also a number of aloe that are either now starting to show their blooms or continuing to show their wonderful blooms. There's Euphorbia that actually also now develop their blooms. sure you've noticed there's a fair amount of condensation on the glass of the greenhouse at the moment, and that's because I did water slightly some of the plants during the last week, and that humidity, of course, as the temperatures start dropping, especially at night, that humidity, of course, is quite visible in the greenhouse. And one of the important things now, of course, over the next weeks is to ensure that the humidity, the relative humidity in the greenhouse starts to drop from, currently, if we have that strong condensation, it's probably up to 90-95% humidity during the peak when the windows and the door and everything is closed. And we want to be getting that humidity down as far as we can. In my climate, I will probably not get it ever during the winter months below maybe 60% relative humidity. And that's with using dehumidifiers in the greenhouse as well. That's okay, a lot better than 90 or 95% humidity, which, I would have if I wouldn't have dehumidifiers and I'd have a lot of wet substrate still in the pots. Apart from the fact that wet substrate during the winter dormancy period is not a good idea for most of our plants, very high risk of root rot. And so therefore, cool temperatures, dry substrate, and they'll be fine even with very little light until the new growing season starts again in the spring. And there's actually also a number of cacti that are now during fall preparing for their bloom season during the winter months. So there's the Thanksgiving and the Christmas cacti. Those are epiphytic cacti that actually quite appreciate a little bit of a let's say dry dormancy with, if possible, slightly cooler temperatures in the fall, so that they can then develop their buds and start showing their wonderful blooms during the winter months. Other plants that I grow with my cacti and other succulents are so-called cool house orchids from the genus Roseoglossum, used to be called Odontoglossum. And those are orchids that are outside growing in the garden, in the shade of trees throughout the summer, but I bring them in during the winter because they actually quite like those cool temperatures that the cacti are standing with during these winter months. And that's also when they'll start to develop their wonderful blooms. I'll keep you posted on those cold house orchids once they start developing and showing their magnificent blooms as well. That's due for normally the December-January period. But let's see what they come up with this year. I must say the timing couldn't have been better, because I was just over the last week bringing in all the last of my plants that were growing outside of the greenhouse, and I already had a bit of a hunch that we might be getting a little earlier these cold nights that we often get at the end of October. Just looking at the weather forecast, it just looked as if we're going to get some earlier cold nights, and that's exactly what happened. The last two nights, they were prognosed by the weather forecast to be round about 1 degree plus, around about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. But what actually happened was the temperature fell 1 or 2 degrees lower than that even. And so the last two nights, we've actually had frost, -1 and then -2 degrees centigrade. What's that? 30 and 28 degrees Fahrenheit. So I was actually very happy and somewhat lucky to have brought in all those plants from the outside last week, because everything was safe and sound here. The frost came, but all the plants are safe, so no big deal. The greenhouse is now packed again full to capacity, as it always is in the winter months, because now I've got a lot of epiphytic cacti. I've got my orchids that I usually grow outside. I've got, a whole bunch of other cacti and other succulent plants that I grow outside. Also some pelargoniums, and those are normally all outside of the greenhouse during the summer, during the frost-free months. But they're all inside now. And so you can just imagine a full greenhouse has just become a little fuller. But who cares? As long as the plants are safe and as long as I can still move around in the greenhouse, that's really the most that I should be asking for. My electric heaters are actually blowing, hot air with, depending on the setting, either 1 kilowatt or 1,000 watts or 2,000 watts. So they're blowing hot air, but I don't want that hot air to damage any plants. So I have those electric heaters installed standing on the floor of my greenhouse, and the hot air basically is blown onto bricks and also a sheet of dark slate. That's really to store the heat, and I've got a fan that distributes that warm air from the base up into the upper parts of the greenhouse. Now, of course, if I would not have any ventilation, the hot air would just simply rise to the top of the greenhouse, and I'd probably have a layering of the temperatures of the air, and I would only have warm air at the top and pretty cool cold air at the base, something that obviously I want to avoid. So again, with a number of fans circulating the air, keeping it in movement, I can actually ensure a more homogeneous temperature from the base to the top of the greenhouse. Nevertheless, the top of the greenhouse will always be just a notch warmer than the rest, and that's of course where I keep my plants that also in the summer need the greatest warmth and sunshine, and so also in the winter they'll be catching the slightly warmer temperatures at the top of the greenhouse. This is not only the time to be bringing in plants from the outside, plants that are not frost hardy, this is also the time to do a bit of autumn cleaning. So a lot of plants that have shown their wonderful blooms over the past months, those withered, dried up blooms, if you can, just remove those carefully from the plants, take them down and remove them, because they will often be the starting point of fungi growth, and that's not something you want to happen on your cacti if possible. So removing those dead, withered pieces of plant, blooms, etc., that's a really good precautionary activity in order to minimize pests. Also, talking of pests, this is the time, of course, to be on the lookout for mealybugs or other pests that might be hiding in between the pots, in the substrate, top dressing sometimes, or just, in the nooks and crannies of the cacti. I must say, and obviously I don't want to jinx it, but so far so good. I've not actually noticed any pests in between my plants. I've tried to grow them with as much fresh air and air movement during the summer months as possible. That's certainly something that reduces the number of pests. I also actually have a number of predatory insects, if you like, quite a number of bees and wasps and there's spiders and all these insects that live among the cacti, and quite happily live among the cacti. I deliberately let them live there because they will often be the best cure against some of the cactus pests. You know, they'll just, I mean, wasps, if you've ever seen the way that wasps go after mealybugs and sometimes even scale, it's quite impressive. You know, 2 or 3 wasps will actually clear a cactus of its mealybugs if they can. But it's mainly lots of fresh air through open windows in the greenhouse, open door, and air movement through a number of fans. You know, that just works wonders to help keep our plants healthy. Talking of fans, that's also something which is really important now in the upcoming winter dormancy period, because those fans, with the air movement that they generate in the greenhouse, that not only reduces the risk of fungal infections, but also the risk of pests altogether. So as a result, I always have a number of fans, 1 or 2 oscillating fans that are running on timers usually in the greenhouse, and that just help circulate the air. Because on cool rainy days, of course, the windows, I've got automatic window openers. They won't open the windows, so there is a risk, of course, that the air becomes stagnant in here. But all the more reason to have a couple of fans that just move the air inside. Also, because quite a number of plants might still have slightly damp, humid substrate in their pots, especially plants that are sitting in large pots. You know, the larger the pot, obviously, the longer it'll take to dry out the substrate. So that's where you really need to keep an eye out for root rot. You might actually be under the impression that all your plants are standing dry, and that might well be the case with all the plants in the small and medium-sized pots. But those plants standing, especially in glazed ceramic pots, that they don't breathe. They're like plastic pots, and the humidity can really stagnate in those pots, and you want to make sure that the substrate completely dries out from those pots as well, not just from the small pots. So extra care on the larger glazed ceramic pots or plastic pots. That's where you are running a bit of a risk if you don't get that substrate dry quickly enough in the autumn. You're running potentially the risk of root rot developing on those plants standing in those pots. Because the thing to remember as well is the sunshine during the autumn months now, of course, is a lot less intense than it is during the summer months, apart from the fact that obviously there's shorter days, so less of the sunshine, but it's also not as intense. And so the evaporation out of the substrate and out of the pots works a lot slower than it does during the hot, warm, sunny summer months. Now, I just mentioned the importance of the removing of old plant material, dead plant material, withered flowers and things like that from your plants. And talking of withered plant remains or leaves, this is the time of year, of course, also that quite a number of Euphorbia, for example, Euphorbia that have fleshy green leaves during the summer, they will start to prepare for the winter dormancy where they shed those leaves. And so don't be surprised if those leaves on the plants start turning yellow and then brown. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, that's because the plant needs a lot more water. No, be careful. It's the opposite. The plant actually needs less and less water at this point in time, and just allow those leaves to wither, to fall off, remove them, and basically that's what the plant normally does as part of its natural cycle. the seasonal cycle. And you'll see in spring, when you slowly start watering those plants again, they'll actually bring out a set of new leaves, and you'll see wonderful little shoots and buds and those fresh green leaves redeveloping for the new growing season. So beware those, especially Euphorbia and also a number of other caudex plants, but also if you're growing Commiphora, Burseras, Boswellias, those are all plants that will naturally shed their leaves during the winter months, and we should reduce the watering during these months, because the plants are actually cutting back, almost stopping their metabolism, photosynthesis, etc. So if you were to water a lot during these months, you're basically putting the plant under stress, because the plant can't really pick up that moisture very successfully, and the roots will be standing in that humid substrate, in that wet substrate, and that's a real risk for root rot again. Now, a very cool anti-cyclic pattern is shown by the elephant's foot plant, the wonderful Dioscorea elephantipes, because that's a caudex plant that actually, it shows and does exactly what I was just describing, except it does it anti-cyclical. So it throws off, it sheds its green leaves during the heat of the summer, and in autumn, with the cooling of the temperatures, it redevelops its shoots and its vine-like stems, and it basically starts a whole new growing cycle in the autumn, and that goes right over all the winter months. So that's a plant that actually does require careful watering, but you shouldn't keep it dry. You should provide water, because it will be actually actively growing over these cool winter months. And talking of growing over the winter months, there's actually a number of succulents, especially from the parts of southern Africa that have winter rain, and those are plants that actually will be showing growth over the winter months. There's a whole bunch of conophytums, but there's also a very interesting group of succulent plants from the genus Adromischus, and those are beautiful plants. Actually, I can only recommend getting some of those for your collection if you're into weird looking, beautiful looking succulent plants with fleshy leaves. Then Adromischus is definitely a genus worth checking out. And they have the Adromischus cooperi, and there's others, also hybrids, that have just really unusual forms. They usually show their blooms during the autumn months, and they show their new growth and active growth over the winter months. So that's a quite nice, contrast to the majority of our cacti and other succulents, of course, who are, snoring away over these cool and dark winter months. This is Adromischus filicalis, which I grow in a hanging pot. These are very ornamental plants. I love them. Another Adromischus in a hanging pot. Quite an old specimen. Now, epiphytic cacti, like the Cactus ackermani up here, those are cacti that come from a more forest setting, natural habitat, and they actually also need a little bit of water over these winter months. Not a lot, but just every now and then a little sip of water, just to keep those roots from completely desiccating in their pots. I grow most of mine in hanging pots, and those of course are even more susceptible to drying out. So Like I say, every 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on the temperatures we've had, a couple of sips of water, and they'll be quite happy, and they will be ready to go for the coming growing season again in spring. I mentioned Euphorbia with fleshy leaves earlier, and that they quite like shedding their leaves in autumn and then basically just being throughout the dormancy period without those leaves. There are some succulents, especially those from the milder climates of Madagascar. There's Medusa-type Euphorbias that do also require a little bit of water during the winter months. They won't appreciate being kept totally dry. That's not a problem with many of the other Euphorbias, but these Medusa-type, they are a little more sensitive, and they're also meant to be kept. They have to be kept at slightly higher temperatures in the winter months. So I recommend at least 15 degrees centigrade. What's that? That's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If you like, check out part 2 of my recent tour of my Euphorbia collection, and there I've actually shown how Euphorbia will occur all the way from southern Africa up the coast of eastern Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, but in fact also across into Asia, Southeast Asia. And depending on where your Euphorbia plants originally are coming from, they'll also need a little bit higher temperatures and a little bit more water during the winter months, or not, which is the case for most of these South African Euphorbias. I grow those without any problems together with cacti at those minimum 5-6 degrees centigrade. Just keeping them frost free is fine with quite a number of those, like Euphorbia obesa, for instance. Now, one of the activities coming up in the next weeks now, so probably towards the end of October, early November, when the weather really starts turning cold, that activity coming up is of course going to be insulating the greenhouse. So insulating against the cold winter temperatures that we get here. Our winter temperatures, they can easily go down to -15 or even -20 degrees centigrade at nights in December, January, February. So those are temperatures, of course, where you'd be heating a lot more the greenhouse to maintain the temperatures, the plus temperatures that you want to keep in there. You'd be heating a lot more without the insulation that can be added either on the inside or on the outside. Now, for practical purposes, and also to actually keep the humidity down, because there's a lot less condensation on the inside of the greenhouse if I have the insulation, the bubble wrap covering the outside of the greenhouse. So that is going to be an activity, like I say, that is coming up for probably end of this month, end of October, early November. And one of the reasons I'm still holding off from that is the temperatures aren't that cold yet, but also the autumn sunshine can still enter the greenhouse unfiltered in this way. Once I've got the bubble wrap insulation on the outside of the greenhouse attached, then of course quite a bit of the UV and the intensity of the sunshine is filtered out, if not completely filtered out, by that bubble wrap. And not a problem during the main period of the dormancy, because as I said, the plants aren't metabolizing anyway. But this time of the year, where we're still wrapping up and we're kind of phasing out from the growing season, that sunshine that we get, it's not that often that we have beautiful sunny periods, but it's wonderful, and it's really important for the plants to catch every ray of sunshine this time of the year. An important task ahead of bringing the bubble wrap insulation onto the outside of the greenhouse is to now check on all of the fasteners of the bubble wrap on the outside of the greenhouse, because some of those might have broken off, some of them might need replacing, and that's exactly what you need to do still during the time that the temperatures are above zero, because a lot of the adhesives that you need for these glass or acrylic glues, they won't really work anymore once you get too cold temperatures. And that's why, as long as it's still halfway warm or mild outside, that's the time to replace those fasteners on the outside of the greenhouse. There are a couple of plants, a couple of cacti even, that I do keep outside of the greenhouse over the winter months. They'll be in a rain-protected location. It's the winter frost-hardy cacti, like a number of prickly pears, opuncias, and they will actually quite like that cold winter treatment outside of the greenhouse. It'll keep them strong, and it'll really encourage their blooms in the early spring when they get going again. I'm actually also putting a number of other cacti that are winter hardy into a cold frame outside of the greenhouse, and I'll let you know how that goes as well, with which plants I put there and how they're doing over the winter months. Often it's not so much whether they can take the very cold temperatures, it's more about, are they dry enough to withstand the frosty temperatures. Oh, something new that I thought I'd share with you is, for this winter, I've actually installed a camera in my greenhouse, which I can dial into. I'm connected via an app on my mobile phone, and I can at any point in time see the inside of my greenhouse, and most importantly, I can actually see whether my heating system is functional, and also what the temperature in the two compartments of my greenhouse is actually showing on the thermostats that I have installed there. So one is the warmer compartment for Euphorbia, Caudex plants and all that, where I keep the roughly 15 degrees centigrade minimum, so about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the larger cactus compartment, if you like, which is where I keep a minimum temperature of about 6-7 degrees centigrade, so about 40-45 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a more convenient way for me to check out what's going on in the greenhouse while I'm traveling or while I'm away, and it gives me more peace of mind knowing that everything is working as it's intended to. Or if there's actually like a power outage, or there's been a power outage or something like that, or if there's some other problem, then I can actually either return or ask somebody to check on what's going on. Well, I think that covers the points that I wanted to pass on to you during this early fall, early autumn update. I hope you found some of the information useful and interesting, and I hope that some of it is actually relevant and applicable to your own situations and your own growing conditions. If you've got any comments, if you've got any remarks or questions, just post them in the comments section below. If you liked this video, then I'd be thrilled if you actually clicked a like. And if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, obviously it would be fantastic if you did so. And as I always remind people, if you're subscribing and you click that bell icon next to the subscribe button, you'll also fantastically receive automatic updates, which means every time there's a new video uploaded on this channel, you'll get a little notification and you'll know there's something to check out on Cactus Joe's Cactus and Other Succulent channel. So thanks very much for dialing in today. Thanks very much for staying with me. And I hope to see you very soon again. Stay safe. And as always, happy growing.